is wild to think that in this day and age, two heads of state could get into a grudge match on social media, of all things, that would put an entire economic relationship, billions of dollars in trade, at risk. But it happened. Meet Gustavo Petro, president of Colombia. This guy, you already know. Petro was furious about this. Colombian migrants shackled and marched onto a military plane deported from the U.S., sent back to Colombia. So he posts on X at like 3:30 in the morning local time. The U.S. cannot treat Colombian migrants as criminals. I deny the entry of American planes carrying Colombian migrants into our territory. Trump fires back on Truth Social, threatening tariffs up to 50% on all Colombian goods. We will not allow the Colombian government to violate its legal obligations with regard to the acceptance and return of the criminals they forced into the United States. To which Petro replies amid a big wall of text, "I don't shake hands with white slavers. Overthrow me, and the Americas and humanity will respond." And at this point, it's like, whoa, what on earth is going on? Who's getting overthrown? How does the prospect of a full-blown trade war get conjured out of thin air between Donald Trump and Colombia? And it's only Sunday.
President Trump's whirlwind first week is ending with another bang.
A potential trade war between Colombia and the United States is averted over the weekend.
This extraordinary public spat may be a preview of how Trump will use tariffs as a weapon.
But what we would very quickly learn is that while these two presidents were arguing and threatening and escalating the situation right up to the brink of an actual trade war, their staffers were feverishly working behind the scenes to defuse the situation, to undo the damage that these two men were doing to their relationship in real time.
Thankfully, it was resolved by active work on the part of Colombian and U.S. diplomats, not tweeting back and forth, but actually talking to one another.
Because within 24 hours, official word would come out that the two sides had settled everything.
El gobierno de Colombia informa que hemos superado el impasse con el gobierno de los Estados Unidos.
As if to say, everybody stand down. It's all good. Don't put tariffs on anything. We've reached a deal. We're all good. So what happened? Why did this fight really break out? And who came out on top? So I think what we saw unfold in a flurry of social media posts on a Sunday, we could explain on two different levels. There's the surface level, which is about events and actions and reactions. Then there's a deeper level, which is about the people involved and their relationships with each other. The surface level is easier to understand, so we'll start there. That photo appears to be what started all of this. Donald Trump has long promised to carry out the largest deportation operation in history, if elected. And this plane load of migrants was actually one of two heading for Colombia. But what got a little bit lost, I think, is that according to the U.S., Colombia had already agreed to accept its people back. From the American Secretary of State, Colombian President Petro had authorized flights and provided all needed authorizations, and then canceled his authorization when the planes were in the air. But again, it goes back to that photo. At 9:30 in the morning, Colombia's president posts on X, "A migrant is not a criminal and must be treated with the dignity that a human being deserves. That's why I turned back the U.S. military planes that were carrying Colombian migrants. We will receive our fellow citizens on civilian planes without treating them like criminals." And he ratchets things up one notch further, because he then points out, again on social media, there are more than 15,000 illegal Americans in Colombia right now. What about them? You will never see me burning a U.S. flag or carrying out a raid to return handcuffed illegal immigrants to the U.S. True libertarians will never attack human freedom. We are the opposite of the Nazis. So now, the temperature's going up, right? An hour and a half later, Donald Trump hops on Truth Social and types this: "Petro's denial of these flights has jeopardized the national security and public safety of the United States." And then he lays out his threats. Emergency 25% tariffs on all goods coming into the U.S. And then, In 1 week, the 25% tariffs will be raised to 50%. And the list goes on. Travel bans for Colombian officials, visa sanctions on members of government, a crackdown on Colombian travelers with stricter inspections, all on the grounds of what Trump calls national security. Oh, and he adds this: these measures are just the beginning.
Because of the asymmetries between the two economies, of course, the United States can impose for a short term tariffs on the imports from Colombia, and this is going to be devastating.
Yes, a trade war would be fairly one-sided. The U.S. is Colombia's largest trading partner, generating about $33 billion in two-way trade last year. And that's split almost 50-50 between them. The U.S. gets about a quarter of its coffee from Colombia. That alone is worth about $2 billion a year. The U.S. also imports bananas, avocados, and fresh-cut flowers. Nearly 2/3 of all cut flowers coming into the U.S. are also from Colombia. But from Colombia's point of view, exports to the U.S. make up about a quarter of all their exports.
I mean, we're talking about sectors that employ hundreds of thousands of people. They would have just been destroyed by a 25% tariff on their goods, right? Because who's going to want to pay 25% more to import Colombian flowers if you can get a supplier in Ecuador or in a competing country, you know?
But none of this seems to give Gustavo Petro any pause. He posts yet another message on X, calling the U.S. boring, telling Trump his greed will wipe out the human race, mentioning arrogance, torture, slavery, yellow butterflies, slavery again, libertarianism, COVID, and that's just in the first half of the post.
President Petro is not known for his diplomatic skills, and he picked a fight in the middle of the night that could have had quite disastrous consequences for Colombia.
Because ultimately, Petro tells Trump, "You will never rule us. I will never allow Colombians to be brought in handcuffs on flights. I am a man of freedom, not of chains."
Petro sees himself in grandiose terms as standing up to the empire, as standing up for Latin American dignity and the dignity of the Colombian people.
And he threatened a 25% tariff on American goods, also potentially escalating to 50%. But then, as suddenly as this all started,
Seguiremos recibiendo a los colombianos y a las colombianas que retornen en condición de deportados, garantizándoles las condiciones dignas como ciudadanos sujetos de derechos.
a resolution negotiated far away from the global stage of social media.
These are people who understand the importance of the U.S. Colombian relationship, and irrespective of the behavior or the communications of their bosses, we're looking to try to get things to a peaceful resolution.
Except at the highest level, both sides appeared to claim victory. A White House statement said Colombia had agreed to all of Trump's terms, including unrestricted acceptance of all illegal aliens from Colombia returned from the United States, including on U.S. military aircraft, without limitation or delay. But according to the Colombian ambassador to the U.S., it was actually Colombia's own planes that were scheduled to pick up those migrants the following day, suggesting U.S. military planes would not be used for that particular trip, which appears to be in line with what Petro demanded in the first place. Still, according to one U.S. official cited by Bloomberg, the Trump administration still plans on an as-needed basis to use military flights to deport people to Colombia, though they mention one silver lining if Colombia does indeed provide its own planes in the future. The use of Colombian planes saves American taxpayers the cost of those military flights and frees up U.S. aircraft to help with deportations to other countries. Win-win for the United States, it seems. But let's dig one level deeper. The slightly less often told version of this story isn't really about late-night tweets and knee-jerk reactions. because deportations themselves are not new. Joe Biden deported hundreds of thousands of migrants last fiscal year, and over the course of his administration, 28,635 of them were Colombian citizens. Last year alone, 124 U.S. planes carrying deported migrants landed in Colombia. But
I think in this case, what really made a difference was that it was U.S. military flights. And I think for, Petro, who is somebody who used to be part of a left-wing rebel group, who has this ideology against U.S. imperialism, this sort of set off his nerves.
I think that there's a big piece of him that is perfectly happy to pick a fight with the United States, with Donald Trump, over issues of ideology and ego.
Ideology, because Gustavo Petro is quite widely described as left-wing. Social spending, progressive taxation, environmental protection. This is what he fights for. But even during the Biden administration, there was a growing rift of policy differences between the two countries.
He was staking out positions that were very much not aligned with U.S. interests.
Take cocaine, for example. Colombia is far and away the world's most significant provider of cocaine. Maybe up to 80% of the world's cocaine comes from there. The USDA figures hundreds of millions of dollars worth a week. It's a major export and a big part of the economy. But at the UN,
¿Qué es más venenoso para el ser humano? ¿La cocaína o el carbón?
Petro railed against the US, saying the so-called war on drugs was a failure and that the world's reliance on oil kills far more people than any drug. This is important because for nearly a quarter century, the US and Colombia have been steady partners, economically and from a security standpoint, against transnational crime and especially drug trafficking. But the two countries have adopted increasingly differing takes on how hard a line to take against an industry that is either lucrative or dangerous, depending on how you look at it.
Now you have a new U.S. president who is even more ideologically different from President Petro than President Biden was. And I think that President Petro is using this as an opportunity to come out swinging.
Swinging, perhaps, because layered on top of everything I've just mentioned, Petro is deeply unpopular. His approval rating has hovered in the low 30s, a big dip from where he started when he was elected only about 2.5 years ago.
Colombia has been going through a very tough time with violence increasing in some parts of the country. And, picking a fight with the United States definitely draws attention away from the domestic problems that Colombia is currently facing.
Ultimately, I'll level with you. This whole episode is kind of difficult to explain as the rational actions of two world leaders. And it's tempting to look at what happened, this epic, explosive fight between Trump and Petro, as a kind of flash in the pan. After all, it was over and done with as quickly as it started. But if Colombia had any hope of improving relations with the US, with a new US president taking office, things are off to a rocky start. And what about Trump making an example of Petro the way he did? The White House's position is that today's events make clear to the world that America is respected again. But is that really the case? Does this motivate America's allies to fall in line? Or does it only gradually risk pushing them away?